put on your retro style colored 3D glasses. These are actually my regular glasses, but let's pretend. Let's put on those 3D glasses and enter the 3D zone. With some caveats, but we'll get there.
Perfect. So this is where we ended off in the last one. We mastered the 2.5D, but what about real 3D? Well, we can do that in After Effects, sort of, and that's what we'll talk about here. So we'll start off by just a clean composition. For this, I'm just going to use one of the basic shapes in After Effects. So we'll go up here and choose the star, just double click that. We'll turn that to be some sort of a yellowish color. And we'll give it a orange-ish outline as well. And then just so it's not cutting off itself at the top, I'm just going to move that down slightly, scale it down a little bit. And there we go. So, like last time, we'll take our layer, name that star, we'll turn it 3D, and now we get that little 3D gizmo again, and I can rotate the star, and oh no. It's not 3D, it's just, again, a flat layer. As soon as we turned it negative or positive 90 degrees, we're not seeing it because it's just completely flat. So how do we handle this? Well, there is a secret little drop down over here, right next to the one that we've been looking at a lot in the previous one of changing the camera view. We have something called Classic 3D. You can click on that, and here we see something called Cinema 4D. And if you're a 3D user, you'll recognize that name as a completely separate program, not created by Adobe, but that has a little bit of a partnership with Adobe going on. This is one way. We're going to get into another way a little bit later on in this tutorial about how After Effects and Cinema 4D interacts in a pretty clever way. So we'll change that to Cinema 4D. Not much happens. But if I now open up this dropdown, I can close the transform, and I have something new called geometry options. This wasn't here before. This has been added by switching this to Cinema 4D. So I'll open that up, and we have something called bevel and ba-ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba. The thing we're really looking for right now is extrusion depth. So I can turn that up, and nothing's really happening. Or is it? We'll go ahead and click Shift R to bring up the rotation settings. I'll again just rotate the Y rotation, and aha, we are starting to see there's some actual depth here, which is pretty sweet. So by adding some extrusion depth, we're now able to actually have 3D shapes, which are pretty perfect for something like this, where you're going for something very simple, but you just want to have that 3D edge for a spinning star or a spinning coin or a spinning, I don't know, whatever you want to spin, you can do it using the Cinema 4D dropdown over here, which is pretty sweet. I'm just going to go ahead and create a quick animation here. So I'll set a keyframe for Y rotation, and we'll go to 3 seconds and just rotate that one full lap. So it's rotating around like this. And we'll hop back to our forest scene and just drag in our 3D example composition here. We'll turn that to be a 3D layer, and we'll scale it down a little bit. And now we have a 3D star rotating in our forest environment. Pretty cool. But I want to warn you here. We have a 3D thing that is using the Cinema 4D render inside its own composition where it's been animated. But just like everything else, this is actually a flat 2D layer that we've just positioned in 3D space. So if I rotate this composition now, you will see that it's completely disappearing when I'm rotating it 90 degrees towards the camera. So you just have to be a little bit careful about how you're structuring and how you're building things to make sure that you're thinking about in these different compartments and different compositions to get the end result that you're really after. Another thing we can do to get a bit more of a 3D vibe in here is to add some shading to our layer. So we'll just go to a point here where it's rotating in 3D space, and we kind of expect the edges here to be a little bit darker, right? So what we can do is we can use a new thing in After Effects that we haven't used before, and that's going to be a light. So we'll go to Layer, New Light. That gives us this little menu. We have a couple different options for what type of light we're after. I'm just going to stick with a spotlight for now, and I can change some settings. I'll set the intensity to 100, color can be white, that's fine, and everything else I'll just keep it as it is and click OK. And now we're getting a light that's lighting our star. This light is going to act very similarly to the way that the camera works. So you have your position to change the position of the light itself, and then you have point of interest, which changes where the light looks, basically. And you can move things around like this. Now, honestly, I really don't use a whole lot of this method of working because, personal opinion, this maybe doesn't look all that great. It doesn't really look super flashy. And I think as soon as you start to get into faking 3D things that are not really super well versed in being 3D, you might as well just do it in a separate 3D program. Completely up to you how you want to work, but I'm just giving you a little bit of a warning here that you may end up being disappointed in this workflow more often than not, because I don't think it's really as powerful as maybe you're hoping it to be. So if you want to do something very simple, just getting rid of the light and having a style kind of like this, then maybe this is a good workflow for you. But if you want to do more advanced 3D things, really we need to get more advanced in 3D, and that's where we're going next. I'm going to get a little bit more advanced, but still maybe not super advanced because we're still sort of cramming 3D stuff into After Effects. Again, there's a lot of caveats here, so this is one way of working. It's pretty cool, and I'm just going to show it off so you know that this way of working does exist and you can get a lot of use out of it. But at a certain point, you will reach that breaking point of when to do something fully in 3D versus in After Effects, and all that stuff can be a little bit confusing. But to spark that little bit of interest and a little bit of inspiration, I'm going to show you something cool that you can do with After Effects and Cinema. So we'll go ahead and do Layer, New, Maxon Cinema 4D file. And that will give us a pop-up window. I'm just going to save it to my desktop and call this Cinema 4D Test. And what's happening now is that it's actually firing up Cinema 4D Lite, which is a program that comes free with After Effects through the Creative Cloud Suite. So if you're an owner of Cinema 4D, you would get the entire program. I'm not, so I'm getting Cinema 4D Lite, which is a very slimmed down version of the full program. But it does allow you to do some simple 3D things that you can then bring into After Effects, which is a pretty cool workflow. So this is not going to be a Cinema 4D tutorial. I'm by no means even a good Cinema 4D user. I use it on occasion when I have to. But I'm going to go ahead and create a mesh primitive, a platonic, and I'll just hit save. And my project file is now saved. I'll hop back to After Effects. Wow, wow, wow. Here we go. We have our Cinema 4D thing live, sort of, in After Effects, sort of. So I can hop back to Cinema 4D again. I'll add a deformer, or whatever they're called, an array. I'll drop that in. Here we go. Click save again, hop back, and it's now updating, which is pretty sweet. I can also change my renderer from viewport draft to current, which would be the final result in this case if I were to render it out of Cinema 4D, or I can use the viewport draft. I can change a bunch of settings in here to optimize and make sure that everything is flowing the way that I need it to, because Cinema 4D files can be quite complex and can be a little bit tough for After Effects to handle at sometimes, so that's just worth keeping in mind. We'll switch that back to like so. And another cool thing is that you can actually extract camera data and other data from Cinema 4D into After Effects, and you can also control the camera in After Effects for Cinema 4D. So I'll just go ahead and create a new camera. And I'm going to change the camera from Cinema 4D camera to centered comp camera instead. And just by refreshing, here we go. What I'm now able to do is use the camera settings up here to actually control my view inside of After Effects, which is pretty sweet. So I can orbit around, I can use left and right, I can move in and out, and I can change a bunch of these settings in After Effects for how I'm viewing my 3D model. Now you'll see it is maybe lagging behind a little bit, and this is a very simple scene. So this, again, just a good indication of if you start to get way too complex in Cinema 4D, you may not be getting the real-time preview that you're hoping that you're getting inside of After Effects. But what's cool about this is we can then combine 3D in Cinema 4D, import that into After Effects with 3D layers in After Effects. So I can again create a star, turn that to be a 3D layer, just go ahead and scale that down like so. And when I now orbit around my scene, I'm getting a 3D star, but also my actual 3D shape from Cinema 4D. Now it's not quite working because the star would not really be shown if it's behind this object. Again, this is not really the Cinema 4D objects being imported to After Effects. It's using something called Cineware on a single layer, which means that you're a little bit limited on what you're able to do. Let's look at a third way of importing 3D stuff into After Effects. And for this, I'm actually in the After Effects beta because this is a new feature that at the time of recording was just released. So in the beta, you can actually import some 3D files directly into After Effects, sort of. So what I have is a headphones.obj file. This is just a free model that I downloaded somewhere at some point. And what I can do now is I can import this directly into After Effects. So I'll drag that in. I'm getting my obj file in here, and I can pull that into a new composition. And I'm going to get some options. There we go. So I have some basic options here. And I have some advanced options, and what I want to do is I want to make the object comp size, and then for the advanced section the up axis would be the C axis, and then I would flip that and I get it like this, and there we go. So now I have an OBJ file directly inside of After Effects, and I can rotate that around as well, which is pretty sweet actually. And again, I can light this model using the lights in After Effects just by creating a spotlight like so. But we're, again, not getting the full control that you would get in Cinema 4D or a different program in terms of materials and all of that kind of stuff. But it is possible, and here's a third way of importing 3D models into After Effects. Would you believe it? We're doing a fourth 3D in After Effects example. We'll create a new solid. Now, this last example is not going to be something native to After Effects. This is actually using a paid plugin by Video Copilot, and it's called Element 3D. So we'll go Effect, Video Copilot, Element. And this, just like optical flares and just like every other plugin they create, is very extensive, and you could do a 10-part series on just using Element 3D. I'm no expert on this one specifically, so I'll probably not be making that tutorial series, at least not at this point. I just want to show off the possibilities to be using Element 3D as well. What's nice about this is it comes with some starter pack models, so we'll go ahead and just use statue for now, and we can scale that up. We can stretch it like this, or we can scale it uniformly, which probably is a better option. We can scale it up like this. You can see it has a metal material to it. We have a ton of settings down here for actually changing the way that the material works. We can do a bunch of lighting things. Right here we're using a single light, but we can use sunlight. We can use 360 lighting. This again is a very, very impressive thing that they've been able to build, and getting this to actually work inside of After Effects is also pretty cool, because now I have a 3D model in here and I can create a camera. Just click OK. And now I can zoom in on my model. I can rotate around my model. And this is much more responsive and able to do many, many more things than Cineware is, because this has been custom built for After Effects. So you can do very cool animated things. Again, endless possibilities. If you want to know more about Element 3D specifically, there's a ton of tutorials out there from Video Copilot themselves, but also just all over YouTube. So definitely check that out. But that's about it for now. A ton of different ways of viewing 3D stuff in After Effects. My workflow is mainly 2D or sometimes 2.5D, sometimes stretching it to 3D a little bit, but mostly working in 2D. So a lot of these things are not something that I work with a whole lot, but there's cool things to be done in After Effects with the 3D dimension as well.
We conquered the third dimension. Let's leave that and let's go back to a little bit of the normal After Effects stuff. But in the next one, we're looking at some really cool stuff. We're getting into expressions. What does that mean? Click the link. And if you just want to stick around, click the like, click the subscribe, hang around here, and learn a bunch of cool stuff.